All right, well, let's get started. Welcome everyone to our webinar, Climate Transition Plans, New Expectations. This is the last episode in our three-part webinar series on the SBTi Net Zero consultation, what businesses need to know now. Or is it really the last episode? Well, we'll find out later, so stay tuned for an announcement at the end of this webinar. In its latest draft, SBTi is reinforcing the role of climate transition plans, asking companies to go beyond setting targets and to demonstrate credible and actionable strategies to effectively reach net zero. Today, in this 30-minute session, we will break down the key elements of the draft guidance, dive into climate transition plans, explaining what they are, what has changed under the new draft guidance, and how to align your CTP with the regional regulations. Let us start with a bit of housekeeping rules. So you are all muted and will be for the whole duration of the session. Please post your questions in the Q&A box and we'll answer some of these during the Q&A session at the end. If we don't have the time to cover your question today, don't worry, we will respond via email after the webinar. And then finally, the session will be recorded and sent to all who have registered. At South Pole, we believe in the power of combining human understanding with technical expertise to achieve meaningful impact. And today's webinar will actually showcase this blend with two of our experienced consultants. So joining us today, we have Hannah Franklin, also known as Frankie from our London office. Frankie is an integral part of our team of creatives, strategists, and communication and engagement specialists. Her work focuses on the human element, ensuring that complex climate science is then communicated in clearly, is relevant, and drives action among key audiences. We are also delighted to have Daniele Carbonin, principal consultant, joining us from our Italian office in Milan. Daniele is a valued member of our climate and energy specialist team, bringing deep technical knowledge to the conversation. He's actually currently working on a few climate transition plan projects with clients. I am Fanny de Canière, head of sales for France, Belgium, and Luxembourg, and I am based in Brussels, and I will be your moderator for today's session. In this 30-minute session, we'll tackle some of your more pressing questions, as I said, but of course, there's only so much we can do and cover in 30 minutes. So please, if you'd like to dive deeper, feel free to reach out to any of us or to contact your direct point of contact at South Pole. Let's have a quick look at the agenda. Our focus today is, as said, on climate transition plans, a crucial topic for companies navigating sustainability expectations and regulations. We'll introduce the topic by answering two questions. What is a climate transition plan and why do companies need one? We'll then highlight key changes in the new draft of the corporate net zero standard, including how it aligns with emerging global standards and answers regulatory requirements and investors' expectations. From there, we'll dive into the elements and practical steps to build a credible climate transition plan, how to move beyond ambition to action. And finally, before opening for questions, we'll present a short case study. Wow, a lot of ground to cover in only 30 minutes. So without further ado, over to you, Daniele.
Thank you so much, Fanny, and I'm happy to be part of this webinar event. So putting a focus on one of the main trends that we see arising in the market. But let's start from the basics. What's really climate transition plan? Simply put, a climate transition plan sets out how your business will transform to accelerate the transition to a 1.5 world, which is the precondition to be climate neutral or net zero in the long term. This happens on a double perspective. Externally, it allows investors, insurers, civil society, and regulators to assess the integrity of your ambitions. And internally, it defines how you plan to operationalize and finance your climate ambitions. Think of your net zero ambition as your guiding star, defining your long-term aspiration that shapes decisions, investments, and behaviors across the organization. Much like a corporate purpose or mission, your net zero ambition reflects your company's ultimate environmental responsibility. Both are directional rather than prescriptive, setting out a vision that inspires stakeholders and signals intent to employees, investors, and customers. It is important to note that climate transition plans have shifted in most cases from optional and nice to have to a mandatory requirement, especially in Europe. This mandatory regulation is in place not just to increase transparency, accountability, and comparability of a company's sustainability efforts. It's also looking to drive more sustainable business processes. And beyond compliance, regulations bring the potential to catalyze transformation, encouraging organizations to embed sustainability into their core business models, operations, and across the value chain. A well-constructed climate transition plan is not just a tick box exercise for compliance. It enables long-term value by positioning businesses to thrive in a rapidly evolving low-carbon economy. This in turn creates a more attractive investment case for businesses, aligning with investor expectation of disclosure and future-proofing. We will see it in a dedicated incoming slides further. But now let's dive into the version 2 of the corporate net zero standard from SBTi. As many of you know, the SBTi, Science-Based Target Initiative, is revising its corporate net zero standard. And as part of this process, it has published a first draft of the version 2 of the standard for public consultation. Timeline-wise, the final version is planned to be published in 2026 and come into effect in 2027. While there is a transition period for companies either setting new targets or updating an existing one, the two main points are existing near-term targets and targets set in 2025-2026, thus using the old version of the criteria, will remain valid until 2030 or their end date, whichever comes first. From 2030 onward, companies must set new science-based targets using version 2 of the criteria. More details to come on the transition from SBTi expected at the conclusion of the consultation process. Now let's see in terms of how SBTi has engaged with climate transition plans in the past and now as part of this latest draft. Looking briefly at version 1 of the net zero standard, SBTi used to encourage companies to have a climate transition plan, yes, but with expectation relatively light, let me say. There were no detailed requirements on structure of these plans, timing, or disclosure. With version 2, which is in draft, it changes significantly. The SBTi proposes a detailed set of mandatory requirements for transition plans, aligning closely with frameworks like the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero or the International Sustainability Standards Board. Now, let's unpack the most notable shifts and the new expectations in place. So one worth note is that this is going to be mandatory for all companies setting an SBTi, regardless of the sectors, and potentially regardless of size of companies, depending on the consultation outcome. And this is very important because it's going to close a key gap in the previous standard about demonstrating that a structured roadmap is in place to achieve science-based targets. And on timing, a requirement is that the plan should be published within 12 months of having targets validated. This is to ensure early transparency and accountability. Accountability is reflected by requirements on structure and scope as well. So companies must now include specific elements like governance, strategy, financing, metrics, and stakeholder engagement, making the plan not just a narrative, but a fully fledged operational strategy. And companies must track and report annually against implementation indicators, such as progress on emission reduction initiatives or CAPEX alignment. And finally, the enabling levers. The new and important addition. SBTi now requires companies to disclose the levers they use to enable their targets. That includes internal decisions like R&D investments, for instance, or external strategies like policy advocacy and supplier engagement. This evolution positions climate transition plans as the core of corporate decarbonization. Again, it's important to repeat. Building a climate transition plan is not for a box-ticking disclosure exercise purpose, but it's really a tool for real operational change. And talking about the regulatory in Europe, a key relationship exists between the climate transition plans concept and CSRD. Many of you may know that under CSRD, companies must state whether they have a formal climate transition plan. If not, they must provide reasons and any future intentions to develop one. Which are the key requirements from CSRD we see from the slide? There is a clear requirement to align plan with EU climate targets. So the plan should demonstrate how the company contributes to the EU objectives, including achieving climate neutrality by 2050 and cutting emissions by 55% by 2030. This is in alignment with the Paris Agreement and the EU Green Deal. Secondly, set science-based targets, GHG reduction targets on scope 1, 2, and 3. So targets must be measurable, time-bound, and aligned with climate science. And scope 3 should be included if material, especially for companies with significant upstream or downstream emissions. Then detailed decarbonization measure across operation and value chain. Companies should outline concrete actions, such as switching to renewables, transforming product lines, or greening supply chains. The focus is on how the company will actually achieve its targets rather than what targets the company is setting, which is the part actually covered by the SBTi criteria related to target ambition. Explain financial and strategic impacts. So the plan must discuss how climate-related measures are reflected in the business model, budgeting, investment decisions, and financial forecasts. This helps assess the credibility and feasibility of the transition. Outline governance and board oversight of the plan. The board's role in approving, overseeing, and updating the plan must be disclosed. This highlights accountability at the highest level. And finally, report progress with KPIs and milestones. Companies must report on how they are tracking against the plan using relevant performance indicators. This ensures transparency and allows for year-on-year comparison. So the connection with CSRD requirements and climate transition plan is very strong on these elements. But now look into investor expectations. Let me mention our recent release of the 2025 Net Zero report by Schwab. This year, the focus is more on financial institutions because financial institutions have the power to lead the market and instigate global climate action. Looking at some of the data we collected in this report, we can see a couple of figures here. The most important of which is that in Europe, 78% of financial institutions states that a climate transition plan makes a company more attractive to finance, clearly outlining that financial institution values climate transition plans. And it actually enhances investment attractiveness for those companies which have one. So final takeaway from this data is that companies looking for investment should proactively develop and disclose a climate transition plan to align with investor expectation and improve financing opportunities. If you are curious about other findings included in this global survey, please head to Salpo's website and download the full report. Now handing over to Hannah.
So let's look at how to build a climate transition plan that is actually embedded across your organization. So here, this is not just a sustainability team effort. It must integrate finance, operations, governance, and can even include teams like people and culture and engagement and communications teams. A climate transition plan in this sense is like any other major business transformation project. It needs to be financed, to be operationalized, to be engaging and communicated to your organization and beyond. And of course, underpinned by strong governance. We're going to consider 3 elements today: finance, operations, and governance. When we look at finance, this is about funding the transition. You will need to assess climate risks and opportunities thoroughly. Align your financial planning to those insights. Use tools like climate integrated budgeting and internal carbon pricing, and explore funding mechanisms such as green bonds or sustainability linked loans. One thing we often see that the financial element is a real challenge for organizations, and it can often be one of the weaker parts of a climate transition plan. In terms of operations, here we really want to focus on delivering low carbon outcomes. Something you're probably familiar with: set science-based targets across scope 1, 2, and 3. Improve operational efficiency and shift to renewable energy. Engage your supply chain to support scope 3 reductions, and innovate to bring low carbon products and services to market. In this sense, a climate transition plan is an opportunity exercise, not just a risk exercise. And lastly, in terms of governance, to ensure success in your climate transition plan, you need leadership and accountability at the top and engagement throughout your organization, facilitated potentially by people and culture and marketing and communications. From a leadership perspective, boards must really actively oversee climate risks and strategy. Management should be clearly accountable for climate goals. You should really use and take advantage of cross-functional teams here to drive coordinated actions. And climate should be part of your strategic decision-making process. So we recommend around 6 simple steps to success. On one end, we don't want to be overwhelmed and get stuck in the detail and prevent action, nor do we want to get lost in a tick box exercise. So we recommend to consider the opportunity that a climate transition plan might bring to your organization, and then decide what your ambition is. Now, it's okay if a climate transition plan is a journey or a roadmap, and it's absolutely fine to focus on mandatory disclosure requirements in the first year, with the view to develop something more robust in year 2 or 3. There's also great value here in developing a roadmap or a blueprint towards a climate transition plan, as this is an exercise for year 1 and preparing for year 2. So we find that part of the value a climate transition plan actually brings a business is the process of developing one. So in this sense, it is a tool. It will help you identify what you need to do and where you're already transitioning to a low carbon economy. And then you can plan out your blueprint or roadmap to a climate transition plan from there. And we're heading back to Daniele.
Yeah, thank you. At this point, I'm delighted to mention a specific case study with SNAM, one of the largest energy infrastructure company in Italy. I had the pleasure to collaborate with on developing their climate transition plan last year. SNAM approached us with a strong ambition initially, not just to meet climate disclosure standards, but to lead with a more comprehensive approach that includes biodiversity beyond climate. As Europe's largest gas infrastructure operator, this wasn't just about compliance. It was about thought leadership in energy transition. And yes, South Pole worked closely with SNAM to navigate complex regulatory frameworks, integrating nature-based and climate targets into a unified strategy. This ensured that SNAM's roadmap was not only compliant, but forward-looking and credible in the eyes of investors and ESG analysts. So the final result was a climate transition plan roadmap that positions SNAM as a progressive force in energy infrastructure, ready for a decarbonized and nature-positive future.
To wrap up, we've got a few recommendations to help guide your climate transition planning. And we really want to start with building the foundation. A weak foundation, quite frankly, will lead to a weak climate transition plan. We've seen examples of really detailed disclosure in climate transition plans that actually sit on really shaky ground, and this leads to a weak climate transition plan overall. And these climate transition plans are also at risk of greenwashing. So we've got a few things we recommend that will kickstart your foundation element. So the first thing we recommend is to understand your ambition up front. Think about how this links to your overarching business purpose and what that means for your broader business practices. Workshop your ambition to ensure alignment across your stakeholders. This is really crucial. And we recommend to do this in two ways, both for your business ambition and for your first climate transition plan. Next, clarify and make sure you all understand internally what a climate transition plan is and how it differs from your ESG report or sustainability strategy. 3, conduct a gap analysis across your footprints, targets, and decarbonisation levers. Next, we recommend to assess your climate-related risks and opportunities. And finally, but most importantly, ensure you're establishing a clear governance for overseeing and delivering the plan. So that's on the foundation. Make sure that's strong, it's stable, and your climate transition plan can sit comfortably on top of it. Next, engage stakeholders, something often overlooked, but incredibly important for actually implementing your climate transition plan. We know that early engagement helps build internal support and drive ownership. And this is crucial for implementation and discovering those little nuggets of insight within your organization. Ensure that your plan reflects what matters most to your investors, to your regulators and customers. But don't forget your employees here. These are an important part of your transition plan. We know engaging stakeholders can drive real opportunity. So as I said before, a climate transition plan is an exercise for opportunity as well as risk. So here you might discover new partnerships, innovation, and ultimately work towards new revenue streams. And finally, engagement supports transparency, which builds trust and credibility. And these are essential credentials that are needed for your climate claims to be taken seriously.
Thank you very much, Frankie and Daniele. We'll jump into the questions now. And by the way, thank you very much for sending these through. Again, as said in the beginning, if we don't get to your question today, we'll respond via email after the webinar. I think we have time for a few questions, which is great. So we'll start with the first one. The question is, I am already publishing my sustainability report. How is it a climate transition plan any different? Frankie, would you like to take this one?
Yeah, that sounds like it's up my street. So typically when we look at a sustainability report, we're covering a much broader range of topics, so environment, social and governance. Often these are focused on past actions, they're time bound and they're disclosure orientated. In contrast, a climate transition plan is not just a report of what you've done in the past. It's a forward-looking and strategic plan and document. So in this sense, it specifically outlines how your organization will transition to a low carbon economy. Now, I know we've had a lot of information, so just a really quick recap on maybe what some of this might include. So we definitely want clear targets and timelines for emissions reductions, scope 1, 2, and 3. A strategy for transforming your operations, investments, and business model. Financial implications, as I mentioned, that's a harder one, but make sure it's included. CapEx, OpEx, and valuations. Your governance structures to oversee implementation. And of course, your approach to engaging stakeholders should be in here. And finally, governance to sit underneath this and oversee your implementation. Now, to put that really simply, think of a climate transition plan as the bridge between ambition and execution. So it's a really detailed investor-grade plan that shows your organization and your stakeholders how it will adapt and remain resilient in a low-carbon world. So hopefully that answers that, Fanny. Have we got any more questions?
Yes, we do. Second question, what makes a climate transition plan credible in the eyes of regulators and investors? Daniele, I think you can cover this one.
Yeah, credibility is like the most important concern we see among companies who are drafting a transition plan and stakeholders who are keen to use those transition plan, both matching strategic and transparency in the reporting perspectives. I would say that a credible plan, a credible transition plan must be specific, actionable, aligned with recognized frameworks like the ISSB or the TPT, the Transition Plan Task Force. Of course, from a mandatory reporting perspective, we have in Europe the CSRD. So companies are expected to comply with disclosure requirements from the ESRS E11, which advocate for exhaustive and transparent reporting on the different elements that are key to a transition strategy. Those elements we said before, and they are clear emission reduction targets, ideally science-based targets, the opportunity to address transition risks in the long term and ensure the business resilience, operational and financial strategy to support the transition roadmap. And last but not least, climate governance with strong board oversight. Importantly, transparency is based on verifiable data, assumptions. Transparency must be provided about the financial impact, financial resources, and how the company plans to execute and monitor the transition. So these are key elements to ensure that credibility is in place. Let me say that generic or boilerplate plans are usually seen as red flags by both regulators and investors.
Thank you very much, Daniele. I think we can already wrap up. I just don't want us to overrun, but thank you very much for joining us today. We hope this session provided valuable insights into the draft guidance and climate transition plans. Before we close, and I already spoiled it at the very beginning, we are thrilled to announce that we will be organizing a bonus episode as part of this webinar series. On June 17th and 18th, we'll be hosting a final session of the series with David Kennedy, CEO of the Science Based Target Initiative. This 45-minute session will include a presentation by David Kennedy and a Q&A conversation with South Pole's CEO, Dr. Daniel Clear. The session will end with live and pre-submitted audience questions. So please make sure you submit your burning questions in advance and we'll take them in preparation for the webinar. All participants and registrants will receive a recording from today's session, as said also at the beginning, along with a link to register for this bonus session in your inbox very soon. So please don't hesitate to join us and to share your questions in advance. Thank you again very much for joining us and have a wonderful, great day ahead. Thank you again on behalf of South Pole.